Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. Let's begin with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrast, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven into the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ, amen, and so it is. All right, so instead of starting with quotes today, I'm going to read some statements commonly referred to as old wives' tales or myths or urban legends, a few of which may hold some validity for some of you. And let me say that there has to be a certain degree of truth in them, or they wouldn't have risen to the status that they have. So we're just going to have a little fun with this, and as you listen, see how many of these you have heard before. Okay, the first one, that Friday the 13th is an unlucky day, or that 13 is an unlucky or a sinister number. Next, if you pull out a gray hair, 2 more will appear in its place. That sitting too close to the television screen will make you go blind, or at the very least will cause permanent damage to your eyes. Next, that white wine will remove a red wine stain. Not sure exactly how that one works. Next, that eating chocolate causes acne. That was a big one I always heard in high school. That cracking your knuckles will make them bigger and or give you arthritis. That eating carrots will improve your eyesight. That spilling salt or breaking a mirror will bring you bad luck. That deaths or other tragedies always come in threes. That if your ears are burning, someone is talking about you, or if your palms are itching, that means money is coming your way. Next, that you should dab whiskey on a baby's gums to soothe teething pain. Not sure that's even legal. That swallowed gum takes 7 years to digest. That eating chicken soup will cure a cold. That you shouldn't swim for 30 minutes after eating. This is an especially bizarre one, that if you clip your nails at night, you'll die before your parents. Next, that if you die in your dream, you will actually die in real life. The last one is, if you take a photo of 3 people, the person in the middle will die first, which I hope isn't true, because I'm in the middle of a lot of sets of 3 in pictures during my life. So, did any of those sound familiar to you? Some of those I had heard before, and some of them were new to me. Now ask yourself, do you believe any of them? It's okay if you do. There are no right or wrong answers. Like I said, there has to be some degree of truth there, or they wouldn't be as widely believed as they are. Some of those things were superficial and even humorous, but digging a little deeper now, let's look at some other statements that we have come to believe and accept as true that might warrant a little further investigation to find out why we believe them and to decide if we want to continue to believe them. My title today is Love Means Never Having to Say You're Sorry and Other Lies. Let me back up a minute here and tell you what started this thought process in my mind. I think I've talked about this before, but years ago, I was somewhat famous among my friends and family for creating what we used to call mixtapes. Everyone of a certain age remembers what a mixtape is. But for the benefit of, if I have any young people listening today, a mixtape is where you would record onto a cassette tape various songs from different albums, even from different artists, and you would only record the ones you liked. So when you pop the tape in, instead of putting a record album on and having to listen to the whole thing, the songs you liked and the songs that maybe you didn't like so much, your mixtape, you could record only the songs that you liked, or you could use them to have themes, okay? You could have themes to your mixtapes. There was the all love songs mixtape. There was the all dance music mixtape. There was, you could make a workout mixtape, or I'm breaking up with you, I never want to see you again, and here's why mixtape, or whatever. So presently, that is all done in the form of playlists, which everybody under 40 is much more familiar with, which I am also a big fan of. But the precursor of the playlist was the mixtape. And in our house, the process of making a mixtape was referred to as K-telling, because there was a company that existed back in the 70s and 80s that specialized in these compilation albums, or albums with songs from different artists, only the hits. So in that way, it was kind of the same concept as a mixtape. The company was called K-tel. So when I would be making my mixtapes, my family would say I was K-telling. And I can't tell you how many hours of my life during my high school years that I spent doing this. I was always either doing that or writing in my journals, which my brother always referred to as me writing poetry, but very little of that qualified as actual poetry. So that's always been a passion of mine from way back. And before I subscribed to Apple Music, which is now where I have all my playlist, several years ago, I remember being so excited when I found out that you could create playlists on YouTube. But because at the time I refused to pay for YouTube Premium, where you could listen without commercials, I had to, while I was doing this, listen to all the ads that came on in between every song. And usually they would just get one ad, whether it was a commercial or whatever, that would play over and over again between every song, and it was really annoying. So once when I was creating this YouTube playlist, there was this one ad that was on repeat, and it was for an album by a particular singer whose name I will not mention. But the more I heard this little snippet of the song that this ad was promoting, the more it got on my nerves. And they would just play a few lines of it, and it began, to love me, I needed to lose you to find me. To love me, I needed to hate you to love me. And I wasn't paying particular attention the first few times it played, but after the 20th time, it was hard to ignore. So when it hit me, what she was saying, I remember thinking, that is a truly awful message. It reminded me of a line from one of my favorite movies, a movie from the 70s called What's Up, Doc, with Barbra Streisand and Ryan O'Neal. And at the end of the movie, they did a really cute thing. What's Up, Doc came out in 1972. But 2 years earlier, in 1970, Ryan O'Neal had starred in a movie called Love Story with Ali MacGraw, and it was a tearjerker. And it had been nominated for Best Picture the following year in 1971, as well as, I believe, both Ryan O'Neal and Ali MacGraw were nominated for Best Actor and Actress. And I think that it won the Oscar for Best Music Score, but it did not win Best Picture. Even so, it had been a hugely successful movie about this young couple who falls in love and gets married, and then shortly thereafter, the wife is diagnosed with terminal cancer. And the big scene that everyone remembers is when he's looking for her and he's running down the street with the Oscar-winning music playing behind him, that where do I begin to tell the story of, everybody knows that song. And so he finally finds her, and she's sitting on the porch, and she's crying. And I don't remember the exact context, but they must have had an argument earlier, because he apologizes to her, and she says very dramatically through her sobs, "Love means never having to say you're sorry." And that line kind of stuck in the lexicon of pop culture. Everybody of a certain age has heard that line and knows where it comes from. So that movie had come out in 1970. Then it was nominated for a bunch of Oscars in 1971. So the very next year, 1972, Ryan O'Neal is in this movie, What's Up, Doc, that it's a comedy. It's the complete opposite end of the spectrum from Love Story. And at the end, he and Barbra Streisand find themselves on a plane together, and he apologizes to her for something. And he said, she says the line to him. Then she turns around and she purposely is spoofing and she's batting her eyes and she said, "Love means never having to say you're sorry." And so he pauses for a second and then he says, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." And when I heard those song lyrics, I needed to lose you to find me. I needed to hate you to love me. I said to myself, that's the dumbest, most unenlightened, unevolved thing I have ever heard. But just like those old wives' tales and myths and urban legends, a lot of people believe that. In order to believe that, however, you have to look at life and look at love as what's called a zero-sum game, which we've discussed before. The definition of which is a situation in which one person's gain is equivalent to another's loss, or in other words, in order for someone to win, somebody else has to lose. Thus, I needed to hate you in order to love me. This way of thinking is born out of a scarcity mentality, where the basic premise is that there's only so much love to go around, rather than an abundance mentality that believes there is an endless supply of love. You have to be coming from an all or nothing stance and mindset in order to make statements like, "I needed to lose you to find me," or "I needed to hate you to love me." On the surface, those statements might sound empowering, but in reality, they are anything but. Because what they're implying is that two opposing ideas can't be true at the same time. And we here at Spirit and Truth Sanctuary know that that's not true, that they can. So I want us to take a look at the idea of opposites, or the concept of duality now for a few moments. In the past, I have presented to you something called the Hermetic principles, which originally came from ancient Egypt and can be found in the roots of all modern day religions. One of those principles is the principle of polarity, which states that everything is dual, everything has poles, everything exists as a pair of opposites. So that much of the definition pretty much coincides with what we've all been taught about the nature of opposites, but then it gets a little tricky. It says, like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, only different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. All right, so figure that one out. What it's saying, I think, is that we have believed that opposites are separate, that black is over here and white is over here, with nothing in the middle connecting them. The principle of polarity has a little different take on what opposites mean. The definition continues. Opposites are only two extreme ends of the same thing, with many varying degrees in between. Okay, for example, they give examples. Heat and cold are just two extremes of the same thing, or of the one thing that we refer to as temperature. There is no such thing as absolute heat or absolute cold, only varying degrees of temperature, which is one thing. So instead of hot being over here and cold being over here with just a blank space or nothing in between, temperature, which is pretty easy for us to make this analogy to understand, is this temperature is this singularity, is the oneness, and you have cold over here and hot over here, but then they get less and less so until one just turns into another. The same principle manifests over and over again in things like light and darkness, large and small, hard and soft, black and white. There are varying degrees of each which shade into each other so gradually that sometimes we are at a loss to know where one ends and the other begins. Case in point, one person thinks 72 is hot, another person thinks it's chilly. It's the same degree. All right, so speaking now about opposites in the context of being at either end of the same spectrum, I want to introduce a thought now that I'd never really considered before about a more evolved way to think about light and darkness. I've already mentioned that the zero-sum game, or believing that someone must lose in order for another to win, believing you have to hate someone in order to love yourself, is a very unevolved, unenlightened way of thinking. So what is the evolved or higher consciousness version of this? I'm going to read now from a talk by a man who only gave his first name in the video I watched, and it is Nico. And this is what he has to say about duality, and I had never really heard it explained this way before. He says, when beginning a spiritual path, a lot of people look for certainty, which involves rigidly defining and firmly categorizing what we believe. And this is our foundation. But as a person's path deepens, we have to evolve away from this. As you grow, you will come to understand that everything is whole, complete, and always on a spectrum. That means we can see all sides and all polarities in all things. This ability is what separates the apprentice from the master. Let's take, for example, light versus dark. There is a spectrum within a spectrum of each between what is sacred and what is profane. We all know there is sacred light and profane darkness. But we tend to think that these concepts are only in these terms, okay? That light is always sacred and good, and darkness is always bad, evil, or profane. But few, only the spiritually elevated, understand that there is also sacred darkness and profane light. Profane just means the misuse or abuse of something. And light is a power that can be misused and abused, just as darkness can be sacred. All right, so if somebody shines a spotlight directly in your eyes, especially if you've been in a dark place or if you've been asleep, that is a misuse of light. That can be profane or harmful. The sacred fire you use to cook your food and to keep yourself warm becomes profane when used to burn someone at the stake for their religious beliefs. The sacred water used to keep our bodies hydrated becomes profane when an innocent child drowns in it. The same water that gives life to plants can erode, rock, and destroy houses on a shoreline. The same thing that is sacred when being used in the service of love, respect, and balance becomes profane when abused, mistreated, and disrespected. So what Nico was saying here is that things are not always what they appear to be. And as we grow spiritually, we learn that nothing is separate or always one thing or another. Everything is on a spectrum, just like we talked about with the Hermetic principle of polarity. I'm going to read now a little bit about the nature of reality and how it's not always what we've been taught to believe it is, and what this concept of duality really is. This is from a man named Eric Putkonen. And Eric says, duality does not exist. It's an illusion based in ignorance. Now, let me stop here and interject that there's a difference between stupidity and ignorance. Ignorance just means you don't know something. You're not aware of it. Stupidity is knowing but willfully ignoring. Okay, back to Eric. To explain this, let's use an analogy about a snake. One day, let's say you're locked in a darkened room. A light flashes for a moment, and you see a shape that you mistake for a snake. Based on this mistake or ignorance, something you have seen wrongly, you believe what you're seeing is indeed a snake, which causes within you fear, worry, and suffering. But then the light comes on again and stays on, revealing that what you assumed was a snake was merely a length of rope. As soon as this realization occurs, the illusion is broken and your reality changes. The fear and worry vanish. Okay, so according to Eric, duality is nothing but an illusion. That when you see rightly, you won't be afraid of duality anymore. You won't be afraid or think in terms of darkness being bad. Let's talk a little more about that. I'm going to give you another example of this with a story told by an ancient Greek philosopher that we all know, Plato. And this particular story is called Plato's Cave. The allegory of Plato's Cave describes a group of prisoners who lived chained in a cave all their lives, facing a blank wall. They watched the shadows projected on the wall from objects passing in front of a fire behind them. And they named these shadows. They hear the echoes of the voices from outside the cave and imagine them to be the voices of the shadows, thus making them appear real. The shadows in the minds of the prisoners are reality. They have no desire to leave the cave because they don't even realize there is another, bigger reality. They know no better life. Like the fire that casts light on the wall of the cave, the human condition is forever bound to the impressions that are received through the senses. One day, they manage to break their bonds back to the prisoners and discover that their reality was not what they thought it was. They discover the sun, which Plato uses to represent a higher reality than the one they had always known. Fear is what keeps us in the cave, chained to an illusion that we believe is real. Our unresolved wounds keep us in the cave. Our pain keeps us in the cave. The only thing that will heal us is stepping into the light. Okay, so why is it important that we step out of this cave of ignorance, the illusion that life is this zero-sum game where we are incapable of holding two opposing thoughts in our consciousness, where we can't love ourselves unless we hate someone else? Well, first, because as was just stated, in the light is where our healing lies. But we've also learned today that light can be profane and detrimental if not used in the right way at the right time for the right purpose. It is possible for us to abuse the power of light. But we can avoid this by continuing to evolve spiritually and not getting stuck in the ignorance of believing in the illusion of duality. All right? That we have to have an enemy. We have to have a devil to blame things on. Obviously, for years we have used this phrase around here. We are created by God. We are creative like God. And we are creating as God. And that's the key. Reactive people, okay, which are not the people that are aware of this creative godlike power they possess, reactive people tend to get worked up and excited about what they are against. Okay, they love to push back against things. They love to protest. This is the dualistic, zero-sum mindset of hating you to love me. Dualistic thinking is all about reacting. That's down here on the lowest level of consciousness. Creative people who believe and recognize that they are made in the image and likeness of God, on the other hand, get excited and are passionate about the things that they love. They love to promote things they believe in, art, music, serving others. When people approach them with negativity, they can more easily ignore it because they just don't have the time or energy to react. They're too busy loving and creating. Reactive people condemn those who do not believe exactly as they do. Creative people say, just as Jesus the Christ said, if you're not against me, you're for me. There's a story in Luke chapter 9 where John said to Jesus, Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow with us. So there it is, that scarcity mentality. There's only so much demon casting out power, and if this guy over here who doesn't do it exactly like we do takes some of that power, then there won't be enough left over for us. There's not enough room in that mentality for me to do it this way and for you to do it that way. So if you don't do it exactly like me, you have to stop. I forbid you. There's not enough room in that mentality for me to love myself and you at the same time. I've got to choose myself over you in order to find self-love. But what did Jesus say to him? Do not forbid him, For he who is not against us is on our side. So, it's always our choice what we want to believe, how we want to believe. We can choose to believe old wives' tales, myths, and urban legends. We can choose to stay in the cave of ignorance and illusion, always reacting to life and mistaking what reality is. Or we can step into our light, into our own God-likeness, and create a life where we don't have to hate or push back against anyone or anything else in order to love ourselves and to live a good life. Monsters lie in the dark, but once you turn the light on, you see the monster for what it is, which is usually something you yourself have created within your own imagination. Okay, so there's that part of the teaching. I want to go back now to a passage at the very end of the cave story and expand on it a bit as I'm coming to a close. Here it is. Our unresolved wounds keep us in the cave. Our pain keeps us in the cave. Okay, it keeps us in this illusion of this stark duality instead of recognizing that everything, including truth and reality, are on a spectrum of degrees. That last line of the passage says, the only thing that will heal us is stepping into the light. So that sounds wonderful. Let's step into the light. But how? How do we do that? We also talked a few moments ago about the fact that part of growing up and maturing spiritually is letting go of or moving past a mentality where you must rigidly define or firmly categorize your beliefs, what you believe in. That passage said, as your spiritual path deepens, you have to evolve away from that, meaning that black and white mentality. You have to move away from that, or that zero-sum game perspective of life. You have to get past that and look at things a bit more fluidly. So now we're going to address what the title of the teaching is today. Love means never having to say you're sorry and other lies, because that is a lie. In order to have healthy and productive relationships in your life, you most certainly do have to say you are sorry sometimes. But why do most of us find apologizing so difficult? Remember that old Elton John song, "Sorry seems to be the hardest word"? Why is that? Well, according to a guy I was listening to the other day, it's because our whole concept of what an apology is and why we offer it is wrong. So let's see if we can get some insight from him about the right way and the right reasons to apologize, and see if it makes it any easier. Because if the first passage I read is true, and what's keeping us in the cave of illusion is our unhealed pain, then it would make sense to see if we can do something about that. And apologies are an important step in the healing process that allows us to step out into the light, but only if we're perceiving them and their purpose correctly. So this information comes from a man named Brendan Bouchard. He says, I believe that one of the greatest marks of spiritual and personal power is the ability to apologize and to forgive. For some weird reason, those things are seen as a weakness and regarded by many as giving their power away or allowing the other person to have the upper hand. We've been thinking about apologies and forgiveness in these wrong ways for so long that it has created a generation of people who are walking around most of the time angry and bitter with tons of pent-up emotions inside them. If we do something that causes another harm or pain, even if we think it wasn't a big deal or we didn't do it intentionally, we should still apologize. Because guess what? The apology isn't really about you in that moment. It's not about justifying yourself because you think someone shouldn't feel hurt or shouldn't have been offended. It doesn't matter if you think someone shouldn't feel these things. If they feel them, the feeling is real to them, at least in the moment. If your goal is to have a good and working relationship with someone, you don't want them to feel hurt by the things you do or say, period, whether you intended to cause hurt or not. At that moment, your intention is not the issue. Their feelings are. Now, Time out. This is assuming that you're dealing with a person you care about and are interested in having a good relationship with. Okay, if you don't care, then you won't. He goes on, if so, your attitude should be, I want you to be happy and to feel good. And while I'm not responsible for your happiness, if I've done anything, even unintentionally, to hurt or offend you, then I'm sorry you're having that experience and that you're feeling pain. So that's just basic human relations 101. You don't or you shouldn't want people you care about to be in pain, especially as the result of something you have done or said. Apologizing in that instance is a direct intention on your part of doing what you can to make this person you care about feel better. Now, when you apologize, I'm going on with what he's saying now, this might happen. The person might decide not to accept your apology and continue to make you defend yourself and your actions and to tell you just how wrong you were. At that point, they should realize that it's not about the wrongness of your action necessarily, but it's about how your action made them feel. They should take responsibility for that. Okay, so you did something that made them feel bad. They tell you. You say, oh, I didn't mean for that to happen. I'm sorry. They don't accept it. They just keep telling you how wrong it was. Well, then it's on them, okay? Because you've apologized and they need to own whatever it was that made them feel that way. So how do you handle that? He says, don't play their game. Just say, you know what? I don't know what else to do. I apologize and I have nothing else to say about the matter. I feel bad that you still feel bad. But at this point, it's on you to decide whether or not to drop it. So then he advises, don't let anyone drag you into their emotional drama. If you've apologized sincerely and they're still circling around in it, just walk away. When we apologize, we don't have to give away our power. The easiest way to accomplish this is to be sure our own ego is not attached to the apology by recognizing that the apology is not for us. It's for the other person. All we can do is give it. We cannot control whether or not it's received, but we don't have to stick around and be browbeaten in hopes that it will be. Another misconception about apologies is that if you apologize, it is admitting you were wrong. There's a difference between saying, I was wrong, which you should if that's the case, and saying, I apologize, which only means you're sorry there has been some sort of misunderstanding or conflict that has caused the other person to experience pain. When you remove your ego from the equation, it's easier to apologize because it's not connected to your action being right or wrong. It's simply an acknowledgement that the other person is hurt and you are sorry about that. Side note, if you are wrong and do admit that, it doesn't diminish you as a person or make you weaker. It's actually a sign of personal awareness and growth, which only makes you stronger. Most of our frustration over apologizing to people is connected to our great need to always be right. If you can get past the need to be right all the time, you will most likely find yourself having to apologize to people less. Wow, that was a big mouthful. Now, some people are always going to be offended and take things negatively because that's the level of consciousness they're on. They will always be asking you for an apology. Your job then becomes to limit your exposure to that person. But what if you're married to that person, he asks? Well, then you probably need to sit down and have a serious, intentional conversation about where the relationship is going and if it is still serving both of you. Being offended can become a habit that some people aren't even aware of. If that's the case, they need someone who loves and cares about them to seriously ask them if they want to continue to drown in their own drama and feel bad most of the time, or if they want to make some changes and learn how to drop offenses more quickly. Some people cannot resolve their own internal dramas as much or as hard as they try, but it is not your job as their partner or even as a loved one or friend to play therapist all the time. You have to decide where to draw that line. All right, so You can play therapist for a while, but you need to only you can draw that line of, I can't do this with you anymore. All right. In other cases, though, sometimes when someone is upset, all they need, okay, so if they're not this kind of person that's just circling around all the time in their internal dramas, if it's kind of if it's someone with a normal range of emotions, it says sometimes all they need is a simple apology to be the switch that gets flipped so they can let go of their negative feeling and move on. And if that's all they need and you truly care about them, why wouldn't you be willing to just say, I'm sorry? Sometimes it's about a psychological need they have to release pain, and the apology is the lever you can pull to allow that release to happen. So when you see it's for them and not you, and realize it's making no judgment on your behavior, you can help them more easily and more often through a simple apology. The other side of this is learning how to forgive. If someone apologizes to you, it's really not your job to decide whether or not you think they're being sincere. That's on them. You're getting into your own ego when you insist on a certain kind of apology. When you are not coming from a place of ego, granting forgiveness should be as easy as offering an apology. Forgiveness is not something that you mentally figure out in your head. It is a spiritual discipline, and it is for your own good. When you do not readily forgive, you carry around the bitterness and anger that only affects you negatively. Forgiving, like so many other things, is simply a decision, and it doesn't automatically condone or mean that you accept or approve of another's behavior. To forgive, you don't even need to understand another's behavior. It's just a way to let go of something that negatively impacted you and say, this is not more important to me than my peace. Forgiveness is a way to let go of anything and everything that's no longer serving you. Learn to forgive others for your own mental and spiritual sanity. Remember, any negative feelings you feel another threw at you, you would not be carrying around unless you first made the decision to catch them. Learn how to let go of those things quickly. They do not belong to you. It is possible to just drop the ball or step out of the way. Lack of forgiveness is the equivalent of carrying others' stuff around. Apologizing and forgiving both set you free spiritually. So that's our goal, right? To be free, to feel free, to get rid of the burdens of life. So if you feel burdened down, it might be because you are voluntarily carrying around other people's stuff through unforgiveness. I'm sorry and I forgive you aren't bad words. They aren't words of weakness, and they don't say anything particularly about you. They are words of love. So if you really love someone, you'll not only say them, but you'll say them often with no ego attached. And everyone involved will be the better for it. Amen? Amen. So love means never having to say you're sorry is a lie that we need to get out of our collective consciousness. Amen again. Please join us tomorrow night, Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. for our continuing study, The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And we will also look forward to seeing you on Sunday. I love you. Be at peace. Goodbye.